For a little bit of analysis, we're now joined by Irungu Houghton, who's the Executive Director for Amnesty International in Kenya. Irungu, always good to talk to you. I suppose for many watching, today really represents, in the end, a good journey for Kenyan democracy.
Yes, and good evening, Peter and viewers. I think in many ways, the inauguration of William Samoei Ruto and his deputy really does establish that Kenya is founded on democratic principles. I was very proud to see the judiciary essentially oversee the ceremony, and it is a ceremony that's very loaded in symbolism, and the ascension of power essentially is a civilian exercise, not a military exercise. So in that sense, I think we have restored any concerns that there may have been over the last couple of weeks that we would perhaps descend into violence and disagreement. It has been a good day for Kenya, and I think for the continent.
Yes, people were celebrating, obviously his supporters, but do you think that there's a general acceptance that this was the result and that William Ruto is now president of all Kenyans?
I mean, the inauguration effectively closes the door on the 2022 general elections in many ways. There is a slim crack, perhaps, of a possibility that the full judgment of the Supreme Court, deliberations will make recommendations that will be designed to strengthen the electoral system further. I mean, I think one of the concerns, there were many concerns with this election that will probably be shared across the different political parties and definitely are matters of public interest. Things like, for example, the disenfranchisement or the apathy of about 18 million voters. A number of people did not turn out to vote on the day. A number of young voters did not bother to get voters' cards. And the other concern really has been in terms of the lack of campaign financing rules on dirty money. So as we go into the fifth administration, we still do not have a cap on how much election candidates can use during elections, and secondly, a requirement that they publish or make public where their money is coming from. This was an election in which voter bribery was rife in many ways. Although there was very little violence, the organization Transparency International identified more bribery, and the allegations of manipulation of the Electoral Commission still remain, I think, open in terms of many Kenyans. So I think there is work that needs to be done immediately after the new administration settles in, and that some of that is to do with tightening up our election process.
All right, we'll unpack some of those things just now. Let's talk about William Ruto's speech. I guess some were looking for an inspiring message, given, as you say, so many people that didn't bother showing up to the election, and also those that didn't vote for him. He had to bring all of these people together. Did he do enough in his speech, do you think?
It was an executive speech. It was a speech of a statesman, and it was statements, including executive actions that he proposed to our interest is always in social justice, in human rights, and the protection of the institutions that are responsible for protecting human rights. And I think one of the statements that he made this afternoon that were important was really his reaffirmation of the independence of the judiciary, that his administration will not undermine the judiciary. He made an executive order to appoint 6 judges of the appeal court, something that has been pending for about 2 years with the Jubilee administration. He also spoke about the importance of the National Police Service and the investigative arm of the law enforcement agencies, that they will not be weaponized during his tenure as President of the Republic. And thirdly, he spoke about the right to work and the right to livelihoods by Kenyans who are really experiencing difficulty with the cost of living and also the challenges that have come over the last couple of years with the pandemic and the Ukraine crisis and the impact on food and fuel subsidies. So in many ways, it was a good speech, I think, for many Kenyans. The question, of course, is whether they will be able to deliver on the more complicated, expensive policy provisions that are being suggested. So I think that's really the challenge going forward. It was a magnanimous speech. He spoke about his opponent, the Right Honourable Raila Odinga, and his deputy presidential candidate, Martha Karua. He also announced that the outgoing president will be an emissary and a high-level negotiator for the Republic or for the people of Kenya in the Great Lakes and in Ethiopia, among other conflicts that are currently happening in the region.
Let's talk about Uhuru Kenyatta, because some people might say that that handshake and those smiles might have been a little awkward given the politics going up to the election, and also that we find out that President Ruto has appointed 6 judges that had been rejected by Uhuru Kenyatta. So what are we seeing here? And all of this drama, and then he appoints him as an emissary, and also that former President Kenyatta accepts this commission. Are they drawing a line in the sand, or what's your take?
I think many Kenyans were very happy to see the interaction between the outgoing and the incoming presidents this afternoon. There has been a lot of tension and negative campaigning and criticism that they have levied against each other over the last 3 to 4 weeks. And in many ways, this seems to be the bearing of a hatchet that was, I guess, was provoked by outgoing President Uhuru's support for Raila Odinga. And I think in many ways, whereas it may seem like a calculated move or a move to placate the outgoing president, I think it is a smart and welcome move to have Kenyatta assigned as the role of peace mediator in these 2 conflicts, particularly for Ethiopia and Democratic Republic of Congo, because these are 2 regions or 2 countries that the outgoing president knows well. He's respected for his regional policy making over the last 10 years. And in that sense, what it does is it allows the former president to use these existing ties while the incoming president focuses on the mandate that he has now been given to protect human rights, to encourage or to stimulate prosperity in the economy, and lastly, to ensure that Kenya remains an open and democratic republic.
So, President Ruto, very presidential in his demeanor and his language, but his deputy perhaps didn't get the script, because he seemed to go right for the jugular, talking about coffers being empty. What do you make of that?
No, the deputy president was much more, much reconciliatory in some respects, in the sense that he spoke about, an end to the police state. He inferred that the previous administration had targeted friends of now President Ruto, and in many ways, although he did speak about, freedom and respecting the rights of all, including their opponents and including state officers that they feel had been weaponized against them. It was a fairly pointed speech in many ways, and I think for many of us who watched it, we hope that this is the last one, and that really the negative campaigning that we've seen over the elections, that this has come to an end. And that we're now seeing essentially a country moving forward under their leadership without any sense of fear or victimization or sense of vengeance even. There are a number of things that are also happening that need to be reined in. So, for example, it's not clear that in the President Ruto's commendation of the judiciary and the Electoral Commission, that in the latter's case, that there actually will be no, I guess, disciplinary action taken against the 4 commissioners that broke with the chairperson of the commission. The news today was that the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the commission is currently going through disciplinary processes because of supporting the 4 breakaway election commissioners. And I think what's really important at this point is that we look at what is at the center of the tensions that became such glaring debate issues during the elections, and essentially ensuring that as we move forward with an electoral commission that everybody trusts. Not just some members of the election commissioners are trusted by some political parties and others by other political parties, but essentially the corporate responsibility of the election commission is something that all Kenyans have trust and faith in, not just parts of the commission. So I think that's really the challenge that the new administration needs to also work on in a moment like this. And I guess we are also bracing to see whether there will be a purge of law enforcement officers, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission officers, who in many ways have been labeled as being partisan and hostile to the Kenya Kwanza leadership. Let's wait and see whether they will crack down and purge those that they felt were weaponized against them, or whether they will give them an olive branch as well. And essentially we will move forward without purges.
Irungu, perhaps a final question. I suppose President Ruto will be under pressure to cement a new identity for himself. I mean, he was deputy president for 10 years, so it's difficult to say that he was just a bystander. He's going to have to show that there's a new way and a new order, and do it quite soon.
Yes, I mean, today the framing of his presidency was very much around this idea of him as a former, a former hustler, as we use the language now, a roadside chicken seller who's become this wealthy businessman. Essentially he has, crafted his presidency around the idea of bringing an end to the extreme inequalities, the social and economic inequalities that exist in Kenya. Not very different from South Africa, for that matter. But I think it's important to point out that, he's not an outlier in that sense. He has 30 years of political engagement and leadership with ruling parties. I mean, previous administrations, whether it be the KANU administration of the late Daniel Arap Moi, or the grand coalition of President Kibaki and Raila Odinga. And of course, he has been a deputy president for 10 years, and he ran, although he ran on an opposition ticket in opposition to the Jubilee administration, in many ways he was part of that administration as a deputy president, and he chose not to resign at any point over the last 5 years to run a fresh campaign. So in many ways, I think what's going to be really important is to see how he reframes himself as a champion of the hustler nation, but at the same time ensure that the controversies that have dogged him in terms of corruption scandals, that they do not continue as he takes on this new role as president. So I think these will be the interesting things to watch. And I think for those of you outside of Kenya, I think the other issue will be whether he is able to maintain a voice for Africa in the international policy arena, within the United Nations, within Africa, at the African Union, and secondly, be a champion for a democratic, accountable, and effective governance model for the rest of the continent going forward.
Irungu, always great talking to you. Thank you so much indeed. Let's see what this new chapter in Kenya's history will bring. I'm sure we'll have many conversations over the coming months and years. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Peter, and good night.
All right, that's Irungu Houghton, who's the Executive Director, Amnesty International in Kenya, talking to us about President William Ruto, who's just been inaugurated as the country's 5th president. And this 5th administration, a lot on its plate, but one interesting move. He's appointed the former president as the troubleshooter in Kenya and Sudan. So perhaps an olive branch for a long-standing battle between the two.